Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to my brothers and sisters in Islam, and salam to everyone else. This is Ali. I would first like to thank Veritas and Telemanchos for their time and effort in collaborating on this project, as well as their patience with the overwhelming amount of responses we have received, as well as, in some cases, some rather hostile responses. I think we are all grateful to each other, and especially to our viewers, subscribers, and friends, that have not only taken the time to support us, but to also critique our views. This video will be a follow-up to my opening statement. I plan to clarify my arguments as well as counter some of the general objections presented to all three of us over the past few days. I will be responding to some individually over the next few days as well. So let's begin. First, I think the purpose of this project needs to be explained. Veritas Telemanchos and myself have always taken issue with the presumption of atheism, or should I say negative atheism. Reason being is that we feel that the playing field of rational discourse has been hijacked by a particularly popular philosophy endorsed by individuals that would prefer to merely assume themselves rational rather than having to justify it to their opponents. Now, this sort of view would not be problematic if it was merely a preference rather than some universally applied maxim. Now, as philosophers and theists, we don't mind a good argument. Neither are we averse to trying to persuade others, or having people critique our views. However, there is a difference between discussion and the prevailing doctrine of the day held by many contemporary atheists, which acts as though there is absolutely no claim made on their part, while theists are the only ones subject to having to provide reasons for belief. In other words, many atheists have merely assumed that they have the default position, first based on the concept of one's having some lack of awareness for belief in God, and second, in most cases, an assumed universally accepted epistemology, that of empiricism. Ironically, while atheists are right in criticizing certain societies for having made it taboo to critique religion or discuss it in a negative manner, they have likewise made their position immune to criticism by claiming that it is a mere lack of belief. With this principle in hand, they are free to attack religious views in all manner of ways, without even once having to show any justification because they can always retreat back to their foxhole of lack of belief, while slyly referring to all counters towards their objections as mere duds. They say that they will be ready to change their minds at any time when their no need for justification of epistemological criteria is met, but in reality, the game is already set in their favor, since when even this is critiqued, a mere lack of belief is once again referred to. This is the problem, and to be forward, this is the nonsense we have come to collaborate against. Though we approach the issue in different ways and with different arguments, though for some reason many of our objectors have yet to see that, we have the same goal, to have a fair discussion on the matter of our beliefs. And while I readily agree that the problems I have raised are not a representation of all atheists, to say so, would be doing a disservice to many of our viewers as well, and of the sincere challenges that have been offered to us by some. Now, on to some of the general objections that we have encountered. The first of these objections, while Veritas, and I don't mean to pick on him, decided to take the route of trying to persuade atheists to abandon negative atheism and adopt the more positive form of atheism, the belief that God does not exist, this was not my strategy to begin with. My strategy was merely to persuade negative atheists to affirm that their position was in fact a belief. The belief that because there is insufficient evidence or reason for theism, it is irrational or unjustified to accept. So my argument allowed for negative atheism to still exist under the condition that it was revealed for what it truly was, rather than a mere lack of belief. I then went on to later show that negative atheism was not justified for other reasons, based on the popular epistemic foundation adopted in its premise. I also have other views on what constitutes as a real default position, as explained in a recent video not entirely part of this project. The objection to my argument was that a position was not a belief and that one was perfectly justified in holding to a mere lack of belief. Therefore, atheism still remained the default position, and thus my argument apparently failed, but this is where my objectors are wrong. Firstly, a position is a belief and not a mental state. For instance, there is a difference between being skeptical and having a skeptical position. To say that a lack of belief is a position is to affirm that things such as babies and rocks also have positions. And this is simply nonsensical and is the result of a fallacy of equivocation. One who rejects a claim clearly does not lack a belief in the same way that a baby or a rock lacks a belief, being that there is a distinguished feature of rational consciousness. Therefore, the default position cannot be atheism simply because babies or rocks do not have a belief about theism. They don't have a belief about skeptical rejection of theism either, or better said, they also don't believe in atheism. If one does not accept my reasoning as valid, then I will use the same reasoning adopted by my objectors and henceforth refer to my position as that of negative theism, which defined is the lack of belief that atheistic skepticism is rationally justified. From this point on, then, since I merely lack a belief, and this is all that I intend theism to mean, since definitions are apparently contingent on those who use them, and not on their utility, I will not have to support my position, and atheists will have to justify the rejection of my belief until I am convinced otherwise. Hence, the default position has become subjective and totally irrelevant to the discussion at hand. So, how about them apples? So, moving on. And finally, this is not so much a counter to an objection as it is a rant. Veritas Telemonstros and myself have been accused of being disingenuous, dishonest, and self-refuting because we have not defined a specific god or gods or the particular god that we worship. This accusation originated from a question posed by Dr. Swayzer when he critiqued the propositions in all three of our arguments regarding the absence of evidence not being the evidence of absence. He had posed whether our proposition was in relation to a god concept that is as easily detectable as an elephant versus that of a mosquito. Afterwards, I think many atheists took this, using it to their advantage to assume that we were arguing for a deistic God, which runs counter to our own. And at the same time, many atheists complained that by not defining what the God was, they could not offer us their justification for not believing. I only have two things to say about this. One, while I think the question is valid, Veritas Telemonstros and myself are merely offering a basic definition of God for the atheist community, not because we are trying to be disingenuous or dishonest, but because you cannot accept a more complex concept of God until you've accepted basic attributes. We are not arguing for a deistic God, but a basic concept of God, and while this concept is indeed more difficult to detect empirically, you cannot explain a concept as big as elephants in the room without first showing that there is the possibility of a concept as small as mosquitoes. For it should be clear to everyone that it is easier to swat an elephant than a mosquito. And this is not to say that we are trying to avoid our beliefs being swatted. Rather, we are trying to show that before we can prove that God is personal, we have to show that there is one to begin with, seeing as many atheists adopt the epistemology of empiricism, which only allows them to see any evidence of a personal God as mere illusion. And secondly, I find it absurd that so many atheists are using this as a trump card or addressing this as the problem of our argument. As a theist, it is not incumbent of me to believe in all gods. But as an atheist, it is incumbent of atheists to reject all gods. So they should already understand and be prepared for what they are rejecting, if they consider themselves justified in that rejection. I don't see how we are being disingenuous and dishonest when our basic presentation of God is being used by atheists as a way to attack us, when it should be clear that it is the burden of the atheist to already have justification for those things they already claim to reject. If anything, that seems disingenuous and dishonest. Thank you for watching, and Assalamu alaikum.